And now it's Deborah Kobylt Live.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today on Deborah Kobylt Live. I'm thrilled and honored to have our guest join us today. Please welcome Joshua M. Greene. Thanks for being with us, Joshua.
My pleasure. Thank you, Deborah.
Now, please allow me to introduce you. Joshua is a formidable scholar and author on the Holocaust. You've written a number of books on them. We're going to be talking about them today. Stoppable, which is about an Auschwitz survivor who ended up, an immigrant with pennies to his name and became a Wall Street legend. You'll recognize his name shortly. You've written a few books that are primarily for children, but I read them myself and I enjoyed every bit of them. Signs of Survival. I love that title because it's about two sisters, one who was deaf. And their true story about the Holocaust, and memoir, The Girl Who Fought Back. That's an incredible story about a young girl who her family, I believe, was taken over to the camps by the Nazis, and she stayed behind and lived in a Warsaw ghetto and went back and forth, delivering messages to people, and an incredible story of that young girl. Magnificent. Also, which really captured my attention when we spoke on the phone earlier, you spent about 13 years living and learning in monasteries, right? One in particular that was very well known and attended by George Harrison, whom you got to know very, very well. And you wrote a biography on him, The Spiritual and Musical Journey of George Harrison, Here Comes the Sun. What a magnificent life. You're also married to Esther Lynn Fortunoff, for those who know of the Fortunoff family fame, the stores there back east. We used to go there and frequent them all the time as kids. So I was so excited to learn that. Just a big life you've led, Joshua. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. I'll do my best to try to answer any questions you have about this formidable life that you've just. I couldn't possibly live up to everything you just said, but I'll do my best.
Well, you know how it is with these introductions, but I think you, of all people, will do your best. And I'd like to thank my friend Darlene Chan and the Linda Chester Agency for introducing us. Magnificent, and a magnificent body of work. Let's start first with, we're going to sort of bounce around a little bit. The book, Unstoppable. It's quite a journey. And your interest in Holocaust stories and survival, please.
For about the past 80, 85 years, there's a narrative that's been allowed to dominate people's impressions of Jews during World War II as a people who allowed themselves to be led like sheep to the slaughter. Well, only is that insulting, it's also historically inaccurate. But most of the memoirs do depict Jews as the victims of the Nazis. When I was introduced to the story of Siggy Wilzig, that narrative got turned right upside down. And I thought, this volcano of a man who came out of the camps and death marches and the worst imaginable kinds of horrors to build an empire in oil and banking, which were two of the most anti-Semitic industries in post-war America, that was a story worth telling.
So tell our audience about him.
Siggy Wilzig was born in East Prussia, West Prussia rather, in 1926, and not a wealthy family. And very soon the anti-Semitism was building in this part of the eastern border of Germany. And his family fled under cover of night to Berlin. And ultimately, after having been forced to work at age 14 for 2.5 years in a sweatshop where they made munitions for the German army, young Siggy, Siegbert as he was called back then, along with all the other Jews of Berlin, was sent by train, cattle car, to concentration camp Auschwitz. He lived for more than 2 years, survived for more than 2 years by his wits. He listened carefully when they Nazi guards were talking about what they needed by way of labor. He heard they needed bricklayers. So he would step forward and whip off his cap and say, "Oh, I've had many years experience as a master bricklayer."
Mm.
Later in life, he said, "I knew about as much about bricklaying as you do about belly dancing."
I gather. Great one.
But he did it. He fudged it. And then he heard that they needed nurses for the prisoner hospital. "Oh, well, I was a doctor's assistant for years back home." And he would watch the other doctors and learn. And so he called his wits fox-like.
Mm.
And he managed to survive. He was damaged like anyone coming out of those experiences.
Oh, sure.
But the thing that impressed me about him was that he would not allow those dark memories to dominate his life. He turned that energy around. And there's a word in the yoga circles, a Sanskrit term, pratipakshabhavana, which means taking an emotion and reversing it, so that if there's sadness, you turn that into joy. If there's adversity, you turn that into a resource for moving forward. That was the kind of energy and skill, and I would say faith. He was a very devout Jew, believed in the Almighty. He said, "I didn't survive because I was smart. I hardly have any intelligence," which of course he disproved by what he did after coming to America. But he gave God the credit for his survival. And that, I thought, was important, that we humans are capable of going through the most unimaginable horrors and come out the other side loving life. Siggy Wilzig loved his life. He would stand up in a restaurant and start singing. And patrons would ask his family, does your father own the restaurant or something? No, it's just he's joyful. He loves his life.
Isn't that beautiful? You wonder, are we born this way? Do we become this way? Or is it a little bit of both?
Well, that's the nature-nurture controversy. And I think in Siggy's, it's tempting to say that survivors of the Holocaust had some kind of extra dimension of spirit, of the will to survive. Well, we have to be careful about that kind of cliche, and that's really what it is. Does it mean that the 6 million who didn't survive, they didn't have the will to live? They didn't have a human spirit? Of course they did.
Yeah.
Survivors don't talk about themselves as heroes. They say it was dumb luck that I survived.
I fully understand. My father-in-law was a survivor as well. They took him from his house and they put him in labor camps. And toward the end of the war, he escaped. He was 14. Very often, he would not speak very much at all. I think it hurt him to speak about it. I wish he would have spoken more about it. But he was very resilient as well, and went on to build a beautiful life. There's so many stories. I wish you could tell us every single one of them, because the way you write about these people, I feel like I've known them personally. It's a beautiful story, the way you wrote about him. And I'm going to have people pick up the book. We don't really need to tell them much more about it unless you want to, unless you want to share more about his story when he came to the United States.
Well, I think the most important thing is if he were with us here now. He died in 2003 of a very aggressive form of cancer, multiple myeloma. But I think if he were here today and people would ask him, what is it that you'd like us to understand about your life and your experiences, he would say, don't give in to despair. He says, and he'd tell a story after the war as a way of thanking his liberators. He was liberated in Mauthausen by American forces. He joined the outfit that was collecting evidence for the war crimes trials. It's where Simon Wiesenthal worked as a war crimes researcher, investigator. And it gave him a chance to take his first plane ride. So Siggy's taking, at the age of, what was he, 21 at that point, his first plane ride. And he said it was a cold, rainy, cloudy day.
Oof.
And the plane took off and burst through the clouds. And on the other side of the clouds, the sun was brilliant, bright, beautiful blue sky. And he said, at that moment, God was talking to me. He was saying, sometimes a cloud, a dark cloud like Hitler and the Nazis, comes between us, but I'm still here. That was the kind of guy Siggy Wilzig was.
Right. And he came here and carried that attitude with him and became a very successful man personally and in business. Right.
Oh, he was fearless. I mean, if I hadn't called the book Unstoppable, I was going to call it Fearless. He had a routine. If he went into a business meeting and he sensed any anti-Semitism in the air, he would take off his jacket. He was a short guy, 5'5".
Right.
And he used to wear platform shoes just to kind of come up a little bit more level with other people. And he would always coif his hair up very high, very proud of his hair. He would take off his jacket, roll up his sleeve, and point to his Auschwitz tattoo on his arm. Then point to them and say, you know, the last person who tried to intimidate me was Hitler. He didn't succeed, and neither are you. And then he'd put on his jacket, leave the room, and generally take over their company. Or do something to show them, don't underestimate a survivor.
Yeah, that's the way to quiet a room and take things over, as you said, right? He suddenly would be in charge of the company because he left people aghast, honestly. You alluded also to, you know, his way of thinking, right? Let's dial it back a little bit about you. How were you raised? Where were you raised? Talk about your family, particularly your mom. You were raised primarily by your mother. Talk about your Jewish upbringing, would you?
I was born in 1950, so I'm what they call a baby boomer. In New York, Jewish intellectual parents. My mom and dad divorced when I was 2 years old, so I was an only child raised by a single mother. And she was my best friend. She died 3 years ago at age 95. Highly successful woman in communications. She was senior ranking officer at the Corporation for Public Broadcasting in Washington. Senior vice president at Reuter Finn, which was New York's leading public relations firm at the time. And she always encouraged me to follow my bliss, to use Joe Campbell's term.
Yeah.
She knew how to encourage me, so that when I'm a little embarrassed to describe this, when I kind of dove headfirst into ashram life at the ripe old age of 19, she said, look, you're a grown man. You're not hurting yourself. I don't see that you're hurting anyone else. And this has your passion now. You're exploring spirituality and meditation and chanting mantras and yoga. Go for it.
You do know there were so many parents who wouldn't do that then or now. It's magnificent to watch, allow, and encourage your child to do just that, to follow where, you know, whatever path, wherever it's leading them. That's remarkable. Go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, you're quite right. I mean, you know, have children and just be prepared for every anxiety and fear and insecurity you've ever had in your entire life to come bubbling right up to the surface, because there it is in front of you, flesh of your flesh. And you don't want them to have to hurt and suffer the way you did.
No.
So you get, you know, possessive about, if we could just download all our experiences to our children and spare them the harsh lessons of life, who wouldn't do that? But of course we can't, and ultimately they have to learn in their own way. So that's an enlightened parent who knows to let go and just let young people make their mistakes and grow at their own pace.
Please tell me your mom's name so I can refer to her.
Adele Greene.
Adele. So Adele recognized this in you, and off you went at the age of 19 to the ashram. Where did you go first, and how did you end up meeting George Harris? And it's quite a remarkable story. I'd really like for my audience to hear about that.
I started off at the University of Wisconsin, And in those days, we're talking 1967, 68, we did more protesting against the Vietnam War than we did study in class.
Of course.
I didn't like the tactics of the student protesters. I thought they were rather shameful. And I figured, oh, if I got to do this university thing, at least let me get some travel out of it. So I transferred to the New York University program in Paris. My mom had me studying French from the ripe old age of 6. So I had that going for me. So I went to the Sorbonne in Paris, met this happy, rotund guy, looked like a New York Buddha, who was teaching from a text called the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita is like the Bible of the East. And he was teaching on Sundays at a place called the American Center, which was a hangout for expats like me. You know, there were art exhibits and jazz concerts and so on. And he said, you know, you're a smart guy. You might want to go to London. Our teacher is there from India. And he's staying with some very interesting people just now. You might want to go because it's rare to meet, you know, a very advanced soul like Prabhupada. You know, I hesitated at first because Wally had a shaved head. I figured, well, whatever he's into, if I get serious about it, I'm going to end up looking like him. I'm not sure I'm ready for that. You know?
Okay.
But it was Christmas holiday in 1969. Got on the boat train, ended up in London. Went to this beautiful building off Oxford Street and met the Krishna devotees there, practicing bhakti yoga, devotional yoga. And when they learned that I played organ in a college band, they said, oh, come with us. Where are we going? Oh, you'll see. And we pile into a Volkswagen minibus and go for about 15 minutes. When the door opens, we're in this elegant street. And I see a sign that says Savile Row. I think, wait a minute. Savile Row. This is Beatles headquarters.
That's right.
And if you grew up in those years, you know that 3 Savile Row was Apple Studios, right?
Yeah.
What the hell are we doing here? So we go in, and there's the big green apple on the wall. We go downstairs into a recording studio, and there's George Harrison standing there, you know, skinny as a string bean.
Oh.
You know, goes over and embraces some of his Krishna friends, and they kind of point to me and talk to him something. And I'm thinking, what the heck is going on? What the Beatles? Now, anyone who grew up in that era, to meet a Beatle, forget God. This was, you know, the Beatles here. So he comes over to me and he says, so I understand you play organ. Yeah, yes, sir. And he hands me a harmonium, which is a hand-pumped keyboard instrument from India. He says, well, just play along, you'll pick it up quickly. And they start recording Indian devotional music. So I'm jamming away on this harmonium. And I'm thinking, if I stick with these people, I get God and the Beatles. Okay, I'm in. You know? And I stayed 13 years in ashrams. Learned to read Sanskrit. And after 13 years, came back to America and got academic. You know, finished my religious studies at Hofstra University and then joined the Yale University department for Holocaust testimonies. But it started with George and hanging out with him at his home outside London. That was pretty special.
How well did you get to know him? What could you tell us about him that maybe we wouldn't know from reading it in a book or, you know, on something on Wikipedia?
I couldn't claim to be, you know, a close friend of any kind, but we did spend time together. And what I would say is he was the most warm-blooded, friendly person you would ever hope to meet, as long as you treated him like a human being. If you approached him with that little twinkle, you know, like, oh, now I'm with George Harrison, I'm with a Beatle, he would literally turn around and walk away. He did not want to reinforce. By this time, like he was 20, 28, 29 years old, and he was really well on his spiritual path here, right?
Yeah.
He didn't want to reinforce people's material identities. And them relating to him as a Beatle was very material. They didn't want that. He was very very astute, took his spiritual practices very, very seriously. He was a serious guy when it came to his interests, whether it was gardening
Yeah.
or playing the sitar or studying the Bhagavad Gita. You know, I remember one time he gave us a microphone because after we recorded an album of Indian music, we were booked into clubs all over Europe. You know, they booked us as the Radha Krishna Temple band. And because, you know, it was George on bass. He played bass on this thing, and Ringo on drums. It had a dance beat going for it. But it was Sanskrit mantras. And I remember he gave us a microphone once for our traveling band. He came to the temple and it had a dent in it. These were these Shure microphones that had the circular screen on top.
Yeah.
Kind of fragile. If you hit it on something hard, it would dent the screen. So he said, you know, that's Krishna's microphone. You have to be careful with that. You know, it's God's property. He was teaching us about yoga philosophy. And a lot of moments like that. I think he's the closest we have to a contemporary mystic. I think George Harrison was a contemporary mystic.
You know, I always looked at him, and I didn't grow up in that era. It was after that, of course, I discovered the Beatles and loved them from day one, even at the age of 2. They just spoke to me, right? But he may have been a Beatle and was a Beatle, but I think his life's work for him internally was post-Beatle era. There was so much that he had to say and give musically and otherwise. And I think that's clearly what made him, I guess, happiest, right? Or feel the most content, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely. That became a point where he didn't want anything else. And it, in a strange way, it kind of contributed to the breakup with his first wife, Patty Boyd, because he was giving more attention to Krishna than he was to her. So he was very, very serious about it. Became a strict vegetarian. Chanted every day. At his home, he would bring us out to his home, Friar Park, about 15 miles west of London. Beautiful estate where he was the gardener. He would, you know, hands-on do the planting and the gardening there. And I remember there was a tree, the one tree that had died, and he had an artist sculpt the faces of some of his favorite teachers. So there was, you know, Yogananda's face was there, and Prabhupada's face. He and I studied with Prabhupada, Bhaktivedanta Swami, and he would sit by that tree in the morning with his beads, his prayer beads, and chant the mantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. And he even when the rocker life interfered, he never gave up his spiritual practices.
Yeah, and you capture that so well in your book. Here Comes the Sun. It's a terrific read, people. Please pick it up. Thank you for signing the book when you sent it to me. I appreciate that. It really is a fascinating read. I love the some of the attributes from Mia Farrow, so many from Yoga Journal. I mean, this is a very, very beautifully written. You're quite an observer, and you write in a way you see things that even other amazing writers and observers don't see. You go about 2 steps or 5 steps or 10 even beneath all that. It's a remarkable read. So I encourage people to pick it up. So 13 years in that experience. So here you were a teenager, and you come out and you're in your 30s. What did Mom have to say about that?
She was glad to have you home.
I was going to say, she must have been thrilled to have you home. My kids, you know, they're in college far away, and the minute they come home, it's like, oh, it's so joyful. I'm glad they're pursuing what they pursue, right? But when they come home, you know, it changes everything. So here you are, you're back home, Mom's thrilled, you're studying. But your background as a Jewish man, was always very important, right? Could you tell us a little bit about your grandparents? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, my mother's parents came from Poland,
Hmm.
and in fact, her father was born outside Kiev. He was Ukrainian.
Hmm.
Mother came from Poland, and they managed to come to America in the 1920s when you could still get visas. It was still possible to come here.
Yeah.
My grandmother was very strict. I think she wanted my mom to understand that this world's not going to hand you anything on a platter, especially as a woman. You've got to learn to
Oh,
defend yourself. So she was a bit too tough with my mom sometimes, and my mom processed that very well, but it didn't require religion. She raised me an ethical culture humanist.
yeah.
Ethical culture is not a religion so much as a point of view, a perspective. It came out of World War II, and some of the great thinkers were Felix Adler and people from the Frankfurt School of Critical Theory, like Walter Benjamin and others. And it's a respect for life in all of its many forms, respect for
Mm.
people in all of their diversity. But God never really entered into it. Religion
Right.
is seen as divisive. So I didn't have any interest in religion. I mean, art and music and literature were more the toys of my childhood.
Hmm.
And my mom would take me to concerts, and I lucked out there.
Must have been a bit of a confusing time, though, coming back from 13 years of that study and suddenly immersing yourself into New York and university, or wasn't it? Or was it just like, this is the next progression, this is where I belong?
No, this was a total disruption. Uh,
Mm.
the French sociologist Émile Durkheim coined a term, anomie. It's an interesting word, anomie, anomie, which is the feeling of displacement that you have when you leave a situation that you're familiar with, and you know the language, you know what's expected of you, you know what's going to happen. It's comfortable, and you're thrust into an environment that you don't understand. Well,
Right.
that was me. I mean, after 13 years away, I was adrift in my own city, New York. You know,
Right.
so that was my anomie, my sense of uncomfortable displacement coming back to New York. And at age 32, crashing on my mother's couch. We grew up together in this tiny little apartment, 2 rooms. I slept on the couch, and I didn't know I had to get a job, right?
Yeah.
Well, there wasn't much call in corporate America for mantra chanting. I did get a job, however, at a place called Westonwood Studios, wonderful place in Connecticut that took children's picture books and created animated films using the artistic style of the illustrator and the words from the book. And they were used in schools and libraries for story hour. You might remember some of these stories, Where the Wild Things Are by Maurice Sendak, and all kinds of wonderful
Wow.
children's books from that era. And I was happy there, working with children's stories. And then I married this wonderful person, Esther, whose father at the time had endowed the Yale University Holocaust Video Archive. Now, these were video recordings of survivors of the Holocaust telling their own stories in their own words. And so my late father-in-law, Alan Fortunoff, introduced me to the work there. And I was mesmerized by it.
Mm.
And they said, listen, you are working doing children's films. Come here. We'll give you some of the video testimonies of survivors from the 1970s. People who were telling the stories for the first time. It was raw. I mean, those few survivors who are left today, they've told their stories many times. They know what words they're going to use. They know the
Yeah.
sequence of the events they're going to describe. They know what kind of an emotion they want to evoke from their audience.
Mm-hmm.
Those days, people didn't know what words to use. And sometimes when you watch these videos, the silences are as eloquent as the words themselves. You'll see on their faces, they're grasping for words to describe the undescribable. And sometimes I remember one testimony, there's a stuttering. The woman says, Auschwitz, if I were going to try to describe, and then she starts to stutter. She's and then finally she says, words have not been invented to explain what Auschwitz was.
Wow.
So those early years, before it became familiar storytelling, were very, very revealing. And that set me off on a new path of Holocaust testimony. And that's what I've been doing for the past 25 years or so.
Who have you worked with? I mean, you've worked with some incredible scholars, filmmakers. Tell us about that.
Well, Elie Wiesel, for one, I suppose he's the most easily recognizable name.
Yeah.
Elie did some introductions to films that I did about the Holocaust. And I remember going up in an elevator with him to the recording studio. And I turned to him, I said, Elie, I don't know that this is going to make any difference. I don't know that doing these programs is going to change anything. And I'll never forget this. His eyes got as big as saucers, and he threw his arms up in the air and he said, we have to try. We have to try. And I guess that's been the theme song ever since. We cannot forget the Holocaust. If we do, we open the door to these things repeating themselves, as crazy as that may seem.
Crazy. Look what's happening now.
Yeah.
I mean, this isn't a discussion about current politics, but it's, we're seeing history repeat itself in certain ways, right? So of course these stories are perhaps even more significant than ever, that children go and see them, at museums like the one that we have here, the Museum of Tolerance, and so many other places, that these stories stay alive. Absolutely. So your films, documentaries, have aired where? So that and are they still available for people to see?
They're all on YouTube at this point. Their premiere screening was usually on PBS.
Right.
The first one was called Witness Voices from the Holocaust. And that's right out of the Fortunoff archive. People telling their stories in their own words. All that my partner and I did was to edit them together into a chronology of life before, during, and after the Nazi era.
Mm-hmm.
There was one called Hitler's Courts, which was about the complicity of German lawyers and judges and law professors in Nazi policy. As soon as the legal establishment gave Hitler the imprint of legal authenticity, his success was guaranteed.
Wow.
And then
incredible.
Gone to Discovery and other channels, but initially PBS.
And when did you continue the journey into writing books? Was it always simultaneous? What got you to do that? What inspired you to then put it in writing? And I particularly really enjoy some of the children's books. And let me be clear, they're not, for 5-year-olds, age appropriate, young, I call it, young adult.
Yeah.
Young
adult. 12, 13, 14 is kind of the target readership there.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, Deborah, it started, I did a lot of teaching in yoga studios from those ashram years, teaching the Bhagavad Gita now to yoga studios. Understand that yoga practitioners want more than just the physical side. They want to know, where does this come from? Where can it take me if I do it properly? So a background in yoga philosophy has become important. And that's when they would call somebody like me in to give a class or a series of classes. And people would ask, so how do you reconcile this? Your yoga self, this bright picture of a purposeful universe with what happened in Europe 80 years ago, the darkness and horror there. How do you put those two things together in the same picture of the same creation. And at first, I didn't really have a very good answer. So when the opportunity came up to work with the Yale Archive, I really threw myself into it very deeply. The short form answer that I've kind of cobbled together for people is this: there is a core self within us that is inviolable. It is not the product of subatomic particles and wave functions and quantum fields. It is a different energy, in Sanskrit called Brahman. It is a non-material energy. It is not emergent from matter. It is a separate element that has to be included in the standard model of the universe. It's not yet, but I suspect it will be.
Yeah.
When we are in touch with that inner self, things are okay. When we turn away from that inner self, we can fall very far. When we identify with the biological self, when we identify with the historic self, that's when the racism, that's when the hatred, the bitterness, the prejudice takes over. That's all a physical differentiation between peoples. The yogic vision, the word yoga means union. It's a uniting of all life and all creation in this one very elegant and beautiful picture of where we can go to if we overcome the fears and the prejudices and the darkness.
That's so important. And, a very small segment of the world, of the population, view the world in that way. If only more could, right? If only more could.
We have to try.
That's right. Let's get in. Let's go take a ride in that elevator and say we've got to try. Let's talk about the other two books that you sent me: The Girl Who Fought Back, terrific story, and Signs of Survival. Signs of Survival. What inspired you to write the two of them? Both of them, and your other books. Please mention other books that I may have not read yet, please.
Well, it reached a point where I was very depressed. I mean, writing about the Holocaust is not for the faint of heart. It's a very dark, very depressing time in human history. And I was running around the house with my, jaw on the ground, and my wonderful partner and wife, Esther, looks at me and says, "You're going to find something else to write about." And that's when the George Harrison biography came about. She says, "You're always talking about George in such beautiful terms. Do his story." So I did. And that was pure joy. That was just pure joy. And then after that, I said, how can I write about the Holocaust and not make myself depressed again? So a dear friend, Michael Berenbaum, who was head of the Shoah Foundation for Spielberg for many years.
Know him, yeah. Go ahead.
Said, why don't you write about some of the young women who fought and survived, and show that other side of the response to the Holocaust. So I went to the Yale Archive and I said, do you have testimony by young women who survived that might be of interest to a younger readership? So they turned me on, first of all, to Renee Hartman. Renee was married to Jeffrey Hartman, the late faculty advisor to the Fortunoff archive at Yale, brilliant scholar. And Renee was the only hearing person in her family. Both her parents and her younger sister were deaf. And she and Herta, her younger sister, survived Bergen-Belsen by holding each other's hand. The whole time they were in the camp, they held each other's hand, because if Herta let go of Renee's hand and wandered off, she'd be dead. She wouldn't have survived. And it's such an extraordinary story because a double whammy. I mean, not just Jewish in a concentration camp, but also deaf. Somebody gave the book to Marlee Matlin,
Yeah,
the
Marley. Yeah.
deaf actress who had that wonderful film Coda that won the Oscar a few years ago. And she had been looking for a story about, she's Jewish and wanted to tell the story about a young Jewish deaf child who survived the Holocaust. So this kind of fit. So she went to her friend Steven Spielberg and said, let's make this. So they optioned the book from Scholastic. Scholastic, think Harry Potter. Scholastic's the publisher. And so that's in development right now as a television miniseries. And Scholastic was thrilled with the success of that book and said, would you do another one? Okay, fine. Went back to Yale and said, what else have you got? So they introduced me to the story of Vladka Mead. Vladka was 19 years old when she was a ghetto fighter in Warsaw. Her parents and siblings had been sent off to be killed. And she joined a band of other young people inside the Warsaw Ghetto to form the Jewish Fighting Organization, young people who resisted the Nazis any way they possibly could. Vladka's good luck is that she didn't have typical Jewish features. So she was able, an attractive young woman with blonde hair, she was able to go back and forth over the Warsaw Ghetto wall and mingle in the Aryan section of Warsaw, as it was called, where the non-Jews lived. And she would buy guns, ammunition, dynamite, deliver money to survivors in hiding, get papers back and forth. And her story became the next book, which came out just this past April, called The Girl Who Fought Back.
Magnificent. They're all magnificent. The Signs of Survival, The Girl Who Fought Back. I'm thrilled that also The Signs of Survival was picked up and optioned. I think this would, wow, what a magnificent film it would make. They all would. The Girl Who Fought Back as well, including Unstoppable. A lot of people might not know his story. How do you decide what you pick to write about? Because there's so many incredible stories.
I think sometimes these stories pick me. I'm not sure it's so much a question of me having some insight into what story could be called. You're correct. They all deserve to be told.
They do.
Anyone who's come out of this period, and not just Jews. I mean, again, going to Siggy Wilzig, who became an avid teacher later in life. He would accept invitations to teach in high schools and colleges and churches and synagogues. He became one of the founding members of the Washington Holocaust Museum and would lecture there. His point was, don't think that if you're not Jewish, this doesn't concern you. He says, anyone, anywhere who is the victim of prejudice, bias, the kind of experience the Jews went through, that's you there. There's a part of you that's involved there. And so he would deputize the whole audience. He'd say, I hereby make you all my deputies. Now go out and fight these Holocaust deniers. Know what happened, learn the facts, and stand up and speak up against these lies. Very, very powerful speaker. And I would have to say that he changed me. I never met him, but he changed me. My understanding of human nature has been changed. When one day the phone rang, right? It always starts with a phone call. The phone rang, and at the other end of the line, a voice says, "Are you Joshua Greene?" Yes. You're the one. He's yelling at me. You're the one. I am. What do you mean, like Neo in the Matrix? I mean, what do you mean? I'm either. No, you're the one who's going to tell my father's story. And it was Siggy's son, Ivan Wilzig. Look him up on YouTube. Ivan has a career in music. It's quite an interesting character. He says, you've got the Holocaust connection with your books and films. I'm in music, and you've got the George Harrison connection. I like your books. I like your writing. You're the one who's going to tell my father's story. I said, Ivan, I can't. It's too dark. I can't go back there. I'm going to the light now. He screamed at me. He said, you don't get it. my father was the light. My father was a torch for
Yeah.
every immigrant who ever came to America, you know, to never give up. He was the David who fought the giant Goliath of the you know, the Fed, who wanted to put him out of business for owning a bank and an oil company, and said it was a conflict. I couldn't resist, you know. He beat me down. So
Takes me back to the elevator. We have to.
We have to
right?
try.
We have to try. We have to try.
That's right.
Oh, magnificent. You've done so much in your life. You've worked also with James Earl Jones in different situations, right? Kevin Kline, Sigourney Weaver. I mean, your life's work is tremendous. You know, and as you like to say, you like to tell stories to remember, right? Tell me, actually, behind you, all the books. What do you like to read? What's behind you?
Well, this back there is mostly the Sanskrit library. I mean, those are the reference books I use when I'm writing biographies of Chaitanya, for example, who was the saint in 16th century Bengal who pioneered the kirtan culture. You know, when you go to a yoga class and they play this music, you know, Jai Ram, Shri Ram, and, you know, Krishna, Krishna, Krishna. That kirtan culture, that spiritual music, was made public by Chaitanya in the 1500s, early 1500s. So to write a biography about Chaitanya, which is my next book, I needed to familiarize myself with the literature, what's out there.
Of course.
What do I like to read for fun? I've got favorite authors. You know, I get into these jags, you know, like the Jack Reacher books. So it's like such fun, you know, just a story well told. I like Laura Hildebrand, Seabiscuit, Eric Larson's books, Devil in the White City. People who make history come alive. Davis Sobel, Galileo's daughter, who take people from history and kind of tell the lie to the myth of those people and bring them out as real human beings. That I'm fascinated by.
You know, just dialing it back for a moment, what you said earlier, you know, if you're in a yoga class and you hear music, I like that you ask so many questions. Well, where is that from? I need to go research that. I'd like people to do that a little more. All of us, right? You're someplace and you hear something, be curious about it, because you never really know where that's going to lead you. Look where all this curiosity has led you, Joshua. It's just remarkable. You never really know the path that these situations are going to take us down, right?
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, I taught in the philosophy and religions department of Hofstra University for about 10 years after I got back from the ashram. And I told the students would ask me, how do we get into filmmaking? And how do you do this? How do you do that? I say, look, just go live your life. Go to museums, you know, go travel the world, go listen to music, you know, enrich your soul, expose yourself to beauty, take hikes in nature, you know. Ideas come from all kinds of places, and you can't predict it, you can't script it. Just be open to life's experiences. My friend Shiva, who was recently interviewed, he's my production partner for my documentaries, was interviewed recently. He said something very smart. He said, look, the world is giving you lessons all the time, but are you open to them? You know, if you've got an open mind, every moment of your life is an inspiration. That was Chaitanya's great message. You know, you want to know what a yogi is? A yogi is not someone who, you know, sees rainbows and you know, fairies dancing on tulips. It's someone who has an experience, a deeper experience of the same world that you and I are living in. But he sees it on such a profound level that it's an inspiration for their souls. Yogis are people who see the same world that we see, and they see God present there. I asked my teacher one time, what do you see when you look at a tree? And Prabhupada said, well, an advanced person, you know, distancing himself, he was very humble. He didn't want to take the credit as being a very advanced yogi. He said an advanced spiritualist looks at a tree and doesn't see just the tree body. He sees that there's a spark, the Atman, that Brahman energy, living in the tree body, living in the housing of a tree. It's what makes the tree alive, that spark of non-material energy. Then he goes further. It doesn't see just that individual spark inhabiting a tree body, but in the heart of that spark, he sees the supreme being. So he doesn't exactly see a tree, he sees God. Now imagine waking up every day and being able to look around you and knowing that you're an eternal being, that God is present in every atom of creation, and that you are part of that picture. You are not defined by the limitations of your life, by the traumas that you grew up with. You are beautiful, you are complete, you're whole, and you have an important role to play in the unfolding of creation. I mean, what a wonderful way to wake up.
If only we all could. If only, people think that way, study that way. Just go on a walk. I always like to say, go on a walk. When you go on a walk, even if you're in the city and it's all pavement, there's always something you'll see that will inspire you. It could be something that's on the pavement, written on the pavement. A little flower that pops up from the pavement. When you go for a walk, I feel like you can see so much that will inspire a different way of thinking. I'm sure you feel the same way.
Well, I'm learning. I'm trying to live that kind of life. I also
think you do.
don't claim to be very advanced, but I think it's possible. I think each of us. I interviewed someone one time for an event at the United Nations, Stephen Rockefeller, who is a practicing Buddhist. And I've conducted a lot of interviews, so I can be a little brazen in my questions, a little like you maybe. And I asked him, so what is it like being a Rockefeller? And he took it seriously. He said, well, some of us are called upon to play our parts on a grand stage, on a world stage. Others among us on more humble stages. So, but who's to say which one is more important? Our job is to take whatever opportunities are presented to us and to make the most of them. I thought that was so wise, because from that perspective, nobody is small. I think people can be small-minded, but nobody is small. And what you do and choices you make ripple out, like a pebble in a lake, and those ripples expand and they hit the other shore and they move grains of sand, and little by little we have an impact on the entire creation from our humble little station.
So beautifully said. Oh my goodness. And let me tell you, I would very much like to end there, but I do have one more question because it was part of my childhood. Fortunoff, right? We have to go there because I can't tell you how often as a little kid my mom would drag me into the city from New Jersey to go to Fortunoff. And what was that like, marrying into the family? I know that you and your lovely wife have been together for some time now. I mean, and being exposed to, of course, um, uh, what they developed there over in Yale. I mean, it's been an extraordinary life personally as well, hasn't it?
It sure has. I mean, it was very unexpected. Long Island retail meets Himalayan renunciation. who would have thought, But
right.
I when I came back to New York, one of the first jobs I had, and was, again, there weren't many jobs open. I was selling print services for an Italian print company, and I would go to places that did beautiful upscale fashion magazines, for example, and say, well, I represent this company. Perhaps you'd like to consider printing with us. And Esther at the time was in charge of the Fortunoff jewelry catalogs. And I wrote a letter saying, I think I understand what your family's trying to do, because your catalog is quite beautiful. And I think if we could talk, I'll tell you about my company. So she told her secretary, if this guy calls, he wrote a good letter, I'll see him.
Oh,
So I'm fond of telling people that I never got the account,
oh,
but we got married, and I've never looked back. It was the best decision of my life. I'd like to think that I give her a little bit of the non-retail side of life, and she grounds me. You know, I had my
yeah.
head in the clouds, and she's such a wonderful pragmatist. She has a beautiful thinking mind, and that's been very healthy for me.
Yeah.
The way the Fortunoff family ran their store was so wonderful, a real inspiration. They treated their employees like family. People, as you know, love to go to the stores just because it was such a happy experience.
It was.
So I talk about learning from unexpected places. Go to the, well, they're not, the stores aren't there now, but you could go to the Fortunoff store and learn a lot about how to treat people well.
Hmm. Absolutely. I remember that, just being a customer walking in. It felt right. But I'm a very intuitive person, so I can walk into a room, and for me, even as a little kid, I could tell if something felt right, at least for me, or if it didn't. Fortunoff was one of those places.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that worked out for you. I really am, Joshua. So again, you talk to us about how people can get in touch with you, and again, your latest work, what's going to be coming out next.
The easiest way is to go to joshuamgreene.info. It's all there. I have people who very kindly help me keep up to date online. And so the books are there and the lectures are there and so on. That's the easiest way to do it. Greene with an E.
Greene with an E and M. Let's not forget that middle initial. And again, shout out to the next book that you're working on, if you're able to.
Yes, it's called The Girl Who Fought Back. And it's about a young woman who was a partisan fighter in the woods. And I'm sorry, a fighter in the woods. See, I'm losing track now. The Girl
Yeah, I
Who
thought,
Fought
wait a
Back
minute.
right, that's Vlad Kamid. Fighter in the Woods is the story of Celia Casso, whose family was killed, and she ended up joining the partisans, learned how to ride a horse, shoot a gun, blow up Nazi train tracks, ammunition dumps. Very, very traumatic experience. But again, a testament to what we humans are capable of achieving, even under the most trying of circumstances.
When will that be coming out?
February of 2025.
Yeah, your publicist was just putting that out there on social media. I was very excited about that. So maybe we'll have you back, if you don't mind, to talk about that book.
Well, you're a joy. I wouldn't mind talking with you whenever.
Yeah, no, I would too. Maybe on my visit to New York, we'll all get together. But please pick up The Girl Who Fought Back. Currently out there, you can go on Joshua's website. I'm sure also on Amazon. Signs of Survival, Unstoppable. Here Comes the Sun. And there are other books that you've written that we didn't even talk about. So perhaps we can get to that next time. I'm so thrilled that you joined us today, Joshua. So thank you very much for doing that. And you can find our conversation with Joshua M. Greene on all platforms of YouTube, Facebook, and then as an audio podcast on iHeart, on Spotify, just about anywhere you get your podcasts. Please put in Deborah Kobylt Live and Joshua M. Greene, and it'll pop up for you. So thank you again for joining us, and please invite your friends. I think it's a terrific conversation that we had, and I hope it inspires you. So thank you again, Deborah, for joining me.
Been a pleasure.
I look forward to doing it again. So bye, everybody, and we'll see you next time.